Hello, with me today is expert psychologist, regression therapist and author Dr. Linda Backman, who is an international expert in understanding how reincarnation plays a pivotal role in our personal growth and relationships, and significantly influencing humanity's progress. The author of Souls on Earth, Exploring Interplanetary Past Lives, The Evolving Soul, and Bringing Your Soul to Light, Dr. Blackman has been conducting Between Lives soul regression training since 2002, and she's been featured on numerous broadcasts and webcasts, including Dr. Oz, Coast to Coast, and Gaia Television. Dr. Linda Backman, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, you were trained by soul regression pioneer Michael Newton, and you worked with him for 6 years, training other therapists. And then you founded your own past life and between lives soul regression practice. You say that during your training, Dr. Newton explained, or Michael Newton explained, that at times regression clients would discover past lives that were not lived on Earth. That's a big one. And by 2005, your practice began to include quite a lot of clients who were souls that you say had evolved primarily somewhere other than in Earth bodies. I mean, this is a very tantalizing topic, one which we're going to hear a lot more about as we discuss the 10 books that inspired you on your life journey. So before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your relationship with books.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's kind of interesting that you're asking that. Sometimes I've said to my husband, because he loves books and I love books, that our house might implode if we get any more books and, put them on the shelves. Both of us have always loved learning through books, though he's much more of a fiction reader and I'm, for the most part, a nonfiction reader. But books, and I know you and I will be talking about this today, books are a way of, at least for me, of hearing about something, experiencing something, and then going to see if someone else or others had these same, what, I might have thought were crazy experiences. So books are nonfiction books are written from the core of the writer, but also people who write fiction. And I know some wonderful fiction writers, even some personally, they're inspired by their own personal experiences. So I love books.
I love fiction, and yet, there's something about non-fiction books, especially books that talk about quantum science or things that we don't normally get to experience. They really can, open you up in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So how easy or difficult was it for you to pick just 10?
Well, when you first made this request to me, and I was honored to have you make the request, and I thought, oh, this will be challenging. But the more I got into it and I started, going back in my memory to what book helped me, 20 years ago, or what book helped me 6, 7 years ago, I was stepping onto my own journey of memory of, oh yes, there was that book. Oh, now I remember. And, maybe it was somewhere hiding on a shelf in my house. It was fun, and it was hard to pick and choose.
Yeah, I can imagine. So let's talk about your first book. First on your list here, but I don't know whether you actually did them in a chronological order, but this was Earth, Pleiadian Keys to the Living Library by Barbara Marciniak, which was published in 1995.
Yes, that probably chronologically isn't I don't know, it's hard to remember, but it doesn't matter. It's back in those fairly, I think of words like natal days of starting to learn about souls that come into body on Earth and haven't had their experience incarnate primarily on Earth. So I was looking for a book that felt, as I often do when I look for books, that felt like solid evidence of this author knows what she's talking about. And obviously it's all about Pleiadian culture and the uniqueness of intelligent souls coming from the location in the higher realm that we call the Pleiades. So I was when I read books, or when I go on a search for a particular book in a particular genre of a thread I'm following in that month or those 6 months or whatever, it's like, and this is always hard to put into words, but it's like, does the book feel credible? And some of that, quite honestly, is just my own intuition of, or what I'm reading sits alongside, is sort of replicating what I've heard from 10 different clients.
Mm.
So that's what happened when I found Barbara Marciniak's book about the Pleiades.
Was there anything in there that was really shocking to you?
Well, as you and I will also, I'm sure, talk about in this hour, a lot of this content 25, 30 years ago was shocking to me, period. Because this was not my chosen direction. I mean, not chosen consciously at my human level. And so, today, there's little, if anything, that would shock me, given how many clients I've worked with. And, just for the listeners, just brief comment about regression work. In regression work, I don't give the information to the client. I support the client, and they access the information and they speak it. So today, where I am in my life and in my work life, I'm not sure there's hardly anything that would shock me. But years ago, there were all kinds of things. It's like, really? Does that happen? Yes. So, I think that what happens for me with books is it's almost like, I don't know, the analogy that pops in my head is the difference between a fine tooth comb and so we have combs that have the teeth that are really close together, and we have combs that have big teeth and they're wider apart. So early on, I think the analogy of the comb was the teeth were very close together, and it's like, okay, what's going to get through as I read that feels valid? Today, the distance between the teeth of the comb is much, much wider. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I just finished a couple of hours ago an interview with theoretical physicist Dr. Amit Goswami, and as he says, there are infinite possibilities, and if there are infinite possibilities, then anything and everything can happen.
Mm-hmm. And he's such a fascinating man. I know exactly who you're speaking of. Yeah.
So book number 2 is, this book comes up again and again and again, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Incredible book.
This really steps into my own journey. Of course, and when you go read about that Frankl's book, it's high on lots of people's lists, of course, because it's probably one of the most powerful, impactful, pithy, whatever the words are, books I've ever read. But for me, because I started discovering my own past lives, I don't know, about 30 years ago. And I've known for a very long time that I had a past life where I died during the Holocaust. And so as I was discovering the details of that particular past life of mine, reading Frankl's experience and how he survived a very crazy, horrific, probably a lot of people might not survive it. It just really related back directly to my knowledge of my own past life, where I actually lived during the Holocaust and died during the Holocaust.
Did it trigger any memories that hadn't already surfaced?
That's a good question because I read it so long ago. Probably my best answer is yes. And yet I don't recall specifically because so many, and this happens for a lot of people, and I assume there will be listeners that can relate to this. I've watched a movie, or I've read a book, or I've traveled somewhere in the world where my past life memories surfaced or expanded. In other words, maybe I already knew about a particular life, but the details expanded. So I'm sure, yes, that it did when I first read it. Yeah.
Yeah. Book number 3 is Edgar Cayce's Past Lives of Jesus by Glenn Sandifer. I would think, there may be some people who are having their mind stretched a little by hearing about past lives on other planets. I would think that past lives of Jesus, people would say, what? He came more than once?
Well, and here's where I would say my psychologist training, my research training, because I think for just about anyone who gains a doctoral degree, you have to learn research methods. And so that's in part how I go searching for books. And so an important thing to say, there's a lot I could say about past lives of Jesus. So I'll start with this. More than one author, channel, deeply intuitive person has identified some of the past lives of the one we call Jesus, and they don't know each other. These channels, these capably psychic people, they don't compare notes and say, well, I got this inkling that Jesus was X person. And so when we see that overlap, then that's where in a case study method of research says, so if you have 5 different channels, but they've not talked to the other channels, how is it not valid that that soul, the one and I always say the one we know is Jesus, because Jesus isn't the name. When that person was Jesus of Nazareth, that was not the given name that person had. And then along with that, Sandie, is my I because I've guided regression for so long, I have no idea how many clients I've worked with over the years, but I have clients who start describing such details. So I honestly, me personally, I have no doubt that the one we know as Jesus, that soul that, in my opinion, is what we call an ascended master, not the we all know, if you study history, Jesus, or the name of that person was Yeshua or Yeshua, depending on how you want to pronounce it. That person, Yeshua, didn't found Christianity. Those were people that came after Yeshua. So that the soul of Jesus is an ascended master who actually comes into a lot of regression sessions as a highly capable spiritual guide. But yes, I do completely believe that soul was evolving prior to being the one we call Jesus of Nazareth.
Had you thought about that before you came across this book?
That's a great question. Early on in my career as a regression therapist, no, I had not considered that until I started. I have sat before Edgar Cayce's channeled material was put on the internet. I've sat in the library at his center in Virginia Beach, Virginia, reading transcripts. And but no, I had never considered that. But that's what I love about regression is when I talk about what I always say what I know is because I've heard it far more than once in an unprompted regression session with a client. Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Book number 4, Reinventing Medicine by Larry Dossey, MD.
Well, he's one of my favorite people in the world, to be quite honest. I remember the first time, I do have the privilege of knowing him personally now, but I remember the first time I heard Dr. Larry Dossey speak at a conference, and I didn't know him back then. And I was just blown away by his persona, his wisdom, his attitude. If anyone knows his story of how he stepped into the world of trusting intuition, it's written in the beginning of the book, that particular Reinventing Medicine, that book of Larry Dossey's, where he believes he has a dream one night about he's an intern at the main hospital in Dallas, Texas, and he has a dream that the chief of internal medicine, where Larry Dossey is interning in the Department of Internal Medicine, he has a dream about the chief of that department, his son, having a medical problem. And just to make a long story short, then the next day, Larry Dossey is sitting in the cafeteria eating his lunch, and rushing through the cafeteria for a medical appointment is, I don't remember whether it was the chief or the chief's wife, carrying their child because there was a medical problem with the child. And that's what, it was a premonition dream. And that's what Dossey experienced. And as incredibly wise and left-brained and smart as Larry Dossey is, he's equally right-brained and intuitive, and he talks about that openly.
So how did that book impact you?
I think, I think the best answer is that I'm often, if not nearly always, looking for books that are left-brained, right-brained. And that merging of head and heart, or cognition with emotion, or intuition with left brain material, that's to me where we find the core of knowledge of who we are, why we're here, where we came from. And that's where Dossey comes from. I mean, he's massively intelligent and smart, but he also trusts intuition and has had an impact on medical schools, training their docs, their individuals in med school to trust not just what are the symptoms or what shows up on an X-ray or an MRI or whatever, but to trust like the woman says, or the mother says, or the father says, I just know there's something wrong in this part of my body or my child's body. And if they research it, they often find out that's valid.
Yeah. Bernie Siegel says the same thing. He always tells his, used to tell his patients, if you have a dream, take note, especially if it's about your health, Yeah, absolutely. So number 5 is Meetings at the Edge by Stephen Levine, which was published in 1980. And I love the way you say, perhaps death and dying have always been my passion in life.
And they really have, though. I didn't understand that years ago when I was, involved with hospice and things like that before I fell into this kind of work. And, a number of these books have, were published long ago, as you could tell by looking at them. But Stephen Levine, who is no longer with us in body, who was a friend and contemporary also of Ram Dass. They knew each other well. Stephen Levine, again, was someone who looked at life from a deeper perspective and did a lot of work around the notion of death and dying, and shared his wisdom about that. And, for me, Sandie, because I work with people studying the sequence of their lives, the sequence of their incarnations. And then we come upon, just using Stephen Levine as an example, Stephen Levine, though I don't know, I've not regressed Stephen Levine, but I would assume the trajectory of Stephen Levine's lives include a lot of experiences of gaining deeper and deeper and deeper wisdom, because I think that that's partly where wisdom comes from. It doesn't just come from this lifetime. And so, yeah, Stephen Levine, again, is someone I heard speak years ago and was fascinated.
Yeah. So book number 6 is Soul Retrieval, Sandra Ingerman.
Yeah, Sandra, or I know her as Sandie, she's a dear friend. And I met, my husband and I met Sandra Ingerman when we took our first shamanic training workshop with Sandra in Tucson, Arizona. And I was just barely stepping onto the path of believability of such things. And so we met her and then trained with Sandra progressively in different courses, different training programs that she offered. And she's a very dear friend, and I greatly respect her. What stands out for me when I think about Sandra Ingerman is having taken her soul retrieval training, 5-day intensive training. Now it's probably 20 or more years ago, and learning how to guide soul retrieval, which very much parallels regression work, and working with one of my first practice clients who, after I learned how to traditionally, conventionally do the shamanic work to regain lost parts of self, if you will. And I'll just tell this briefly, but so I'm pretty green, if you will, at doing the work. I do this soul retrieval journey for this woman. I see images in my mind of what I need to return to her. And it's a blanket, a baby bottle, and a rocking chair. So we finished the soul retrieval with the formal process. And I explained to her the images I saw. And I said, what does that mean anything to you? And I figure she's going to go, no, Linda, it doesn't mean a thing to me. And she says, oh, yes. She said, I have talked with, I don't know whether it was an aunt or some family member of the client. And she said, when I was 18, the client says to me, when I was 18 months old, I had spinal meningitis and I nearly died. And I was in the hospital for days. And what I've been told is that my mother rocked me for hours and hours. They took away my blanket and burned it because they thought it was contaminated. And they forced my mother, why I don't know this was the case, but they forced my mother to wean me from the bottle. And she said, I know that was a horribly traumatic time. And she said, so I think that's why I knew none of this about the client. So I remember learning all those tools and skills from Sandra, and she's such an awesome shamanic teacher.
Yes, she is. Yeah. Yeah, I've had the privilege of interviewing her. So, okay, the next one was by your mentor, Journey of Souls, Michael Newton, published in 1994.
Yes, early on as I was stepping into regression work, I discovered Journey of Souls. That's Dr. Michael Newton's first book. And then I happened to meet him at a conference where he was giving a talk. And he convinced me to take his first, it was his first formal training program, training people in the work that he did in what we would call between lives soul regression. And so he was my mentor, and then we were co-teachers, training people. And I believe so many things in our life are guided. I think I was meant to meet him, meant to be trained by him, and we became great friends and colleagues. And he's the person that first wrote about regression work, not only into understanding past lives, but understanding what happens after we die, who we are as a soul, how we plan our lives. And his books are beautiful and rich with material.
Yeah. And after that, your work really changed, didn't it?
Dramatically and surprisingly to me.
So what did the people around you think?
Well, kind of two answers to that question. One is, as I gradually started shifting from conventional psychology, because for some years I had a general private practice as a psychologist. And so as I began to make that shift, which maybe I should just briefly back up and explain how that shift occurred, because that probably would help people understand this a little bit more broadly. I had no interest in understanding reincarnation at all, no really deep awareness of whether I believed in reincarnation. And simply put, in 1993, my original psychologist colleague, with whom we built a group practice of psychologists and psychiatrists, sadly, my colleague died in his early 30s of a type of lung cancer in 93. And when he died, and I wasn't into any of this, I didn't believe in any of this. When he died, two things began to happen within days of his passing. One, I had no doubt that I could feel his energy and sense him communicating with me, which had never happened before. And I began to believe he was showing me scenes of past lives we had shared. So I thought, either, Linda Backman, the psychologist, needs meds and a formal diagnosis and whatever else, or there's reality to this. So just briefly, the rest of the story is that I said to my husband, who we'd already been together 20, 25 years. My husband is a university political science professor, retired now. We'd never spoken about reincarnation. And so when I explained to my husband that I was having these intuitive experiences, he looked at me calmly and I said, "You don't think this is weird, do you?" And he said, "No, I don't think it's weird." And I kind of shockingly said, "Why not?" And my husband said, and we're similar age, so we were in our middle 40s at the time. My husband said, "Only now do I recall that as a boy," so he'd repressed this experience. My husband said, "As a boy, around age 10, I remembered my past lives in detail. They came to me spontaneously. I had no doubt they were my lives." But my husband said, "I blocked it all out because I didn't think anyone would believe me." So that was the open door for me in 93. And that's what led gradually for me to read and study. So I was worried that, my referrals back then came mostly from medical doctors. So I thought, well, if these medical doctors in the community where I live find out about this, they'll just think I'm the strangest person ever. And, my whole private practice will go away, which never happened, but I worried about it. And, to be honest, I mean, back then I had children, however old my children were, 20s, early to mid 20s. I'd never taught them any of this. They didn't believe in any of this. So I had to deal with that as well. And so it took me time, because a lot of people, as you well know, don't necessarily believe in these concepts.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. But more and more are beginning to.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so book number 8, God, Sex and Women of the Bible by Shani Lebowitz, published in 1998.
Well, it's a combination of reasons that I put that book in my list. There is so much history in the world that becomes obscured. And you know, I'm not a raging feminist, but I'm a raging let's have balance and equality across the board, whether it's gender or, you know, LGBTQ or ethnicity or whatever. And so as I've worked with clients, both male and female in Body Today, and I'll just add, probably most people would assume what I'm about to say. If we're a man today, we've probably been a woman at least once in past lives, and vice versa. So much of our human culture is not balanced. So that's one of the reasons. Through regression work, I've had many clients go back into, you know, historic times, Old Testament times, and there are definitely women who had an impact on our culture in the times of the Old Testament, and so I enjoyed finding a book where key figures that are female in biblical times are spoken about and taught about. That's pretty much where that book comes from.
You say that one example shared in God's Sex and Women of the Bible focuses on the conventional broader interpretation of the creation of man, as well as who was Eve.
Right. I mean, you know, conventional westernized creation stories, you know, are that theoretically, and I'm not anti-religion, so that's not what I'm saying, but where, you know, supposedly God took Adam's rib, and a rib from, you know, Adam, and that's what became a woman. That's how Eve was created. But because I've studied Kabbalah, and these kinds of practices, what we know is that in particular, the Hebrew language has layers of meaning. And a word in the Hebrew language does not have just a flat, you know, singular meaning. And so then, as I read Labowitz's book, she talks about how, and I talk about this a little bit in my listing of the 10 books, that that gender balance is what, I mean, souls don't have a gender. You don't have a male soul or a female soul. You might have a soul that's had more male lives than female lives. And so Labowitz talks about the potential misinterpretation of the creation story of how a woman came to be. Yeah.
So number 9, Old Souls by Tom Schroeder, published in 1999.
Yeah, Tom Schroeder, I believe he's still alive, is a respected journalist, and he traveled with Dr. Ian Stevenson, who is no longer alive. Dr. Ian Stevenson did the seminal work. He was a professor of psychiatry at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. And Ian Stevenson traveled to various countries in the world where he found children who had past life memories that the children's stories could literally be verified based on birthmarks on people that were talked about. And so Stevenson traveled, or Schroeder traveled with Stevenson, and then Schroeder wrote a book about his experience listening to these. This is not regression work. These are children's spontaneous past life accounts that are so specific, like describing a house and a street, and then the house and the street has it is real and verified, or the description of a woman that was their mother that had, this birthmark on her left cheek or whatever. And so Schroeder's book is, I think, quite fascinating.
Yeah, and that's the kind of evidence we need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, book number 10. This is your own book. Souls on Earth, Exploring Interplanetary Past Lives. Now, when did you get your first client with an interplanetary past life?
Oh, good question. Well, what I remember, I started guiding regression back in probably 94, 95. And I pay attention to my own life, like what's happening, what's changing, who did I meet, how is that purposeful? And so early on in my regression practice, I occasionally had clients where I said nothing to them before the regression started, and they were discovering lives not on Earth, or that they're a soul that comes from somewhere not on Earth. But somewhere around probably 2003, 4, something like that, as my regression practice since probably the late 90s, sometimes I lose track of dates, but since about the late 90s, I have guided regression clients nearly week in and week out, and multiple clients a week since the late 90s. So what I noticed in something like 2003, 4, or 5, in that range of time, is that my regression practice, my clients were almost 50% souls that had lives not on Earth. And I've learned this is a whole topic we can talk about if you like. We all have spiritual guides. That I say that because they show up in regression when I say nothing about spiritual guides. So I noticed that about 50% of my practice in the early 2000s were clients that don't usually incarnate on Earth, even though obviously they're my clients, so they're on Earth. So I basically intuitively tapped into my guides. I also have a couple of very capable people that are private. They don't channel for a fee, but people that I believe their intuition is quite capable in my private life, where I at times verify things. And so my guide said, Linda, we want you to understand the unique qualities and challenges of souls that come to Earth that don't usually incarnate on Earth, why they're here, what their skills and challenges are, so you can help them accept who they are and move forward in their current lives. And so that I realized that was a part of the journey that was intended to be part of my work.
So why do they come here?
I can give you a very simple answer, and then we can go into more depth, but it's an easy, simple answer, Sandie, and that is that so I'm going to back up a step. To give a title, to give a word that I use when we talk about these souls, you could call them ET souls. You could call them star seeds. My guides asked me to call them interplanetary souls, but all those words mean pretty much the same. Interplanetary souls incarnate on Earth because they are advanced souls, and they come into body on Earth in one way or another to aid the evolution of our human culture. And it can be really simple. It does not have to be some well-known author or teacher. I mean, it can be a person like that. but it can be someone who's going to be a great mom, a great dad, a great engineer, a great nurse. They come because they're advanced souls.
And you say that they often have physical, emotional, and spiritual challenges because the earth life and the human body are not familiar to them.
Right. They some of the more common issues that they struggle with are often physical issues, from allergies to digestive disorders to autoimmune disorders. Some of them are diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. Some of them are diagnosed ADHD. And yet the flip side is that they're always very wise people. And again, I don't mean wise necessarily because they, write a New York Times bestseller. They might, but they're people with a broad perspective because they've come to aid humanity. But they might have musical skills just shockingly off the charts at age 10. It's interesting. I often think about uh, America's Got Talent 2 or 3 years ago. There was a visually challenged man. I believe he'd been diagnosed on the spectrum, who won America's Got Talent, and that he is a singer-songwriter, and his skills are utterly amazing. Now, do I know that he's an interplanetary soul? No, but that's a kind of an example potentially of an interplanetary soul. All interplanetary souls are not that challenged. Some are, some aren't. But I've had so many clients who never understood themselves before they had a regression and discovered who they are as a soul and why they're here at this time.
Did they resonate with that, or were they horrified at first?
I would say the way I'd answer that would be some just quickly resonate and say, Linda, I never would have told you that, but I've always sort of known that, the client might say. Or most of the time they're not horrified, but there are times when they've never even considered that type of explanation, that they're just simply a highly intelligent being that came to Earth with purpose.
And with those kinds of clients, how does it impact their life to know that?
It varies, but I would say more often than not, they embrace an understanding and an acceptance of themselves that they never understood before. I mean, I can think of lots of clients in my head, and I'm thinking about a particular man, young man in his 20s, that just had struggled, interplanetary soul, or what I call an IP soul, highly intelligent, very socially challenged, struggling to find his niche in life, and gain more education and find a way of making a living, and et cetera, et cetera. And it took him, I think I probably regressed him 2 or 3 times. And it took maybe 2 or 3 times for him to, for the most part, accept who he is and know there's nothing wrong with him. He's not crazy. He belongs here. So it really varies. I can think of all kinds of people that start coming to my mind, and I'll add this piece in, since we're talking about interplanetary souls. There are times when interplanetary souls that are my clients have struggled. What I'm about to say will speak to the value of understanding past lives. So I might be working with a client, obviously in body on Earth, who is an interplanetary soul, and there was an interplanetary past life with something conflictual. And I want everybody, hopefully, to hear me loud and clear. All past lives don't have conflictual issues. Some do, some don't. Because some people just make the assumption that all past lives have horrible circumstances. That's not true. But in this particular woman who, and I'm being cautious to be totally confidential, this woman had a great deal of trouble with a family member in her current life, and we tracked it back to a past life not on Earth with problems in that past life. And it allowed her to free herself up by understanding what happened and let go of it and move forward. And so that's the value of past life, accessing past life, is to almost like a key in a lock that you finally unlock the door of knowing why you were afraid of this, or why you didn't get along with this person, or why you always wanted to be a musician, but you're an accountant, or, whatever. Yeah.
Have you had clients who access more than one life on a variety of different planets?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there one planet that seems to, send its people on vacation here more often than the others?
That's a beautiful question. And I'm glad you're asking that, because the automatic thing that any of us will do in our heads is, okay, maybe most of the souls that come to Earth that are interplanetary come from Arcturus, as an example.
Yeah.
What I've discovered after years of guiding interplanetary soul clients is that people that are interplanetary souls come from places the names are meaningless to us. And so we're human, so we want to pigeonhole things. That's normal. And so, yes, have I worked with clients from Arcturus, from Orion's belt, from the Pleiades, et cetera, et cetera? Yes. But sometimes they're from either an unnameable place or a name of somewhere that doesn't mean anything to anyone.
I've read books about starseeds, and quite often they will say that that it takes time to step down their energy to be able to cope with this, atmosphere, this 3D, the magnetic field, whatever. And that is an explanation why they often have physical problems. Have you come across that?
I think that's a piece of it. I think that's definitely one explanation, that the energy here is so totally different than what they're used to, or the socialization here is totally different, or the means of communication here is different. The type of nutrition is different. And that, again, is, in very simple terms, the incredibly valuable takeaway for IP souls after they've had a regression is they stop mislabeling themselves. They stop fighting the lack of acceptance of themselves, because finally there's an explanation that is, in my opinion, is logical.
Are there any cases from your book, the latest one, that you would like to share with us? Anything really remarkable?
Well, yeah, there's so many. One that I think in answer to that, I've so many different things I could say. I'll expand the perspective here. And as I was coming up with 10 books, I thought, well, I think I want to include one of my books, because I feel like I do this regression work so as to help educate other people. And lots of people may never have a regression, but most anybody, if they choose to, can read a book. So that's why I put book number 3, Souls on Earth, in the list. My first 2 books are a bit more basic, and I'm contemplating, haven't come to the decision yet, but I'm contemplating a 4th book. And the reason for that is that so what I've learned about souls is that essentially there are 3, we might say, types of souls, or I like to say soul origin. Some of us as souls, our soul was designed and intended to incarnate primarily on Earth. And actually, that is the nature of my soul. Some of us are interplanetary souls, like we've talked about. There's a 3rd soul origin or type of soul, and that's a soul that comes from the angelic realm. That is a soul designed to be a part of the angelic realm that supports, and here's where people have to choose their own words, supports divine energy, or supports the high frequency energy that works to coordinate Earth. We could call it God, the source, Great Spirit, the Tao, whatever works for people. There are souls that you might say serve as ambassadors of divine energy and or angelic souls. And on occasion, some of those souls incarnate on Earth. The core energy or the core attitude or persona of those souls, angelic souls, is love and compassion, is the purest high energy they can carry to Earth, and you might say promote love and compassion. So there really are, as I've come across with clients, 3 types of souls.
So what about messengers? Messengers that come perhaps with knowledge to share or warnings of things to come. Have you experienced that?
So are you asking, Sandie, do clients during regression, we might say, channel messages for humanity? Yeah, the answer is yes. And often the way that's couched in the regression is that the client is working with a spiritual guide in the regression. The guide is supporting, giving information, giving direction to the client. The client learns about their life purpose, or I like to say life purposes, because we don't come into body with just a purpose. And either the guide is giving a supportive message to the client for the client to move forward in their life, and or the client is learning an attitude, an orientation, a way of life that they are to demonstrate, we might say, in their current life.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So you've actually presented twice to the College of Psychic Studies in England, haven't you? And
That's
also correct. At INRIES, the Institute for Research on Extraordinary Experiences in Paris. Do you know Stéphane Alex?
I actually do know him. He is a lovely person.
Well, what an incredible story. He was on this show and also on our radio show. And what an incredible story he's got.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And what a, because you know his story about his brother dying when they were on assignment. What a beautiful way to learn and utilize for others a very difficult challenge in his own life.
Yeah. He didn't ask you to regress him?
That's interesting. And I know Stéphane and his wife is as wonderful and lovely as he is. Actually not. I have not regressed Stefan, but I've been with him more than once. And in my opinion, he's absolutely living his life purpose with what he does.
Yeah. So before we close, tell us a little bit about what else you are doing, because I know you have a podcast.
I have podcasts. People can go to my website to learn about that. It's www.ravenheartcenter.com. Raven like the bird, heart, the American spelling. Or excuse me, not heart, the American spelling. Raven like the bird, heart in your chest, center, the American spelling of center, or the American English spelling, or however you want to put that. And yes, I have podcasts, and there are videos and things like that. I teach virtual courses. I guide regression all the time. And since COVID, I used to travel a great deal. Since COVID, I am guiding regression pretty much exclusively remotely, and it works very nicely. So that's how people can find out about what I'm doing.
So tell us, your podcast, what are you talking about? What kinds of people are you talking to?
It just really varies. Many different people, couple that come to my mind, but people of different walks of life. One is a woman who is a very accomplished orchestra conductor. Her husband was a world-renowned, actually, orchestra conductor. She stayed home to raise the children, even though she's equally trained. Sadly, her husband passed, and she stepped back into the world of orchestra conducting, and she has done a number of wonderful programs and concerts. One about women of the world that have had a major impact. So it's called Women Warriors. Her name is Amy Anderson. So Amy's one. I'm thinking about another man. He is a minister. He's an ordained Catholic priest, but he became a minister of a spiritualist church. And he's very open about, he is a gay man, but he's also an angelic soul, which we learned about through regression. And he's a lovely person. So just various different
people with inspiring stories.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally.
What are you reading now?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's interesting. I used to read a lot of nonfiction. I used to go seeking out new books, that sort of thing. I don't go searching. I learn so much from my clients that when I read, I actually read a bit more fiction now than I ever used to. And so, it's very interesting. My husband is a lifelong reader. I am not a lifelong reader, so I'm very much someone who learns a lot from the internet. And it's just interesting. Off the top of my head, I'm not reading anything. When I do read, and I think that my past life during the Holocaust, which is a life I believe I've, have an acceptance of. But I do like to find books that are based on fact about survival during tragic, complicated times such as the Holocaust. So yeah.
There are many fiction books that I've read over the years that are historical, or set at a historical time, and they blend some fact with fiction, but one gets the clear feeling this is not fiction, this is some kind of soul memory. There's just a resonance there that it's just too, there's just something, the energy within it is telling you that this, Mr. Babylon is one that I hear many people say that about.
I've
Mm,
definitely years ago read Mists of Avalon and the books of that
yeah,
author. I mean, I just suspect that anyone who's writing, if they're writing fiction, there's something that's triggering their interest in the genre or locale or whatever. Uh, I can't help but believe it has a soul level tie.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, I think J.K. Rowling, I often wonder, where has she been? You know, what other planets has she been on? What has she done? Because, you know, what she's delivered, it feels so complete, and it's so rich that you think, you know, where does that imagination come from?
I'm excited about the sequel to the movie Avatar because
Mm,
some of the content of the first Avatar movie mirrors what I've heard about in regression work.
yeah,
And so the person who wrote the script for Avatar, yes, it has to come from somewhere.
yeah, I'm sure. Wow. Dr. Linda Bachman, thank you so much for adding your 10 best list to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. It's a really interesting list, and I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're so welcome. So, Dr. Linda Bachman's books, Souls on Earth, Exploring Interplanetary Past Lives, The Evolving Soul, and Bringing Your Soul to Light. Are they all published by Llewellyn?
They're all
They
three
are. Yeah,
Llewellyn
yeah,
published books.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can get them all good bookstores, I imagine, and certainly at online bookstores. And if you want to know more about Dr. Backman or contact her, you can go to ravenheartcenter.com. So before we go, as we all know, the spiritual book market is becoming increasingly crowded, and it is more and more challenging to sort the wheat from the chaff. And that is why we launched the No BS Spiritual Book Club. So we could provide you with trusted recommendations from authors, teachers, speakers, and others who've walked the path before you. So you can check out our free 10 Best Spiritual Books archive at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com, where you can also view previous episodes of this face-to-face interview series. Add your name to our Save My Space list to get last-minute reminders of upcoming episodes as well. And if you feel that you have a book in you, but you don't know how to begin getting it out of your head and into the hands of those who are waiting to read it, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be what you've been looking for. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 Best interview. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you very much to Dr. Linda Backman.